In this week's Growing with My Buds, do you really need to flush your weed? Flushing cannabis before harvest is hugely debated amongst many growers. So let's go deep on the nitty-gritty on one of the latest studies. Dan, when I was a lighty, I thought flushing your weed was when the cops came to the
Run
door
and flush.
and you'd flush and maybe chow some. But now, flushing your weed is something different.
Yeah, very different. I think it's something that through the advancement of growing weed and the betterment of trying to grow and make it better and taste better and burn better and look better, guys are starting to flush their weed, they flush their plants. You don't do it anywhere else. I mean, you don't do it with tomatoes, you don't do it with any other plant, you don't flush them as far as I know.
Nope.
So...
Would flushing then make a difference? Anybody try?
I mean...
Try?
People say it makes a difference. The reason people say flush it means they say, you wanna starve out the nutrients just before harvest.
Basically
So that the
yeah.
plant's as lean as possible and
or as
and
less excess nutrient as possible.
yeah. Because is that a bad thing, and even how is it a bad thing?
I mean, I think what the thing is, when you're smoking your cannabis, you can taste that excessive nutrient that would be inside this plant, possibly. When your ash burn, when your joint burns, that ash that you get off of it, you can see
It's black, yeah.
what is being left over from what's in the plant. It's the best way to see what the residue of whatever was in the plant at that time, because that's when it carbonizes and it does thing. But yeah, I mean, there's different things, different scenarios. You've got your different growth mediums that require different types of flushing times, and that's just because people have tested them. It's nothing. I don't think there's actual tests. There might be. I think we've got a
It's just a trial.
documentary
There was
on
a
the
trial
where they did do some tests and they did show some results where they've got what happens if they flush for a certain amount of days. So there's
And there's also
it goes from 1 week to 2 weeks to 3 weeks of of them flushing the plants.
Because this is what this article we're referring to is RX Green Technologies. They did a flushing trial, and the summary of it is that they evaluated the effects of different flushing times on chemical profile, flavor, and smoking characteristics in cannabis flower. Flushing periods, so they basically stopped giving nutrients and only water. The flushing periods were for 14, 10, 7, and 0 days. The cultivar, was cherry diesel. The results, though, is that no differences were detected between flush treatments for yield, potency, or terpenes. So they all came out the same, or same enough. And the taste test panelists tended to prefer flower flushed for 0 days. So what you would hear as convention flush, the people who actually blind taste tested this preferred the stuff that wasn't flushed.
So that could mean like a few things. I mean, if you think about what they're doing to the plant, is they are starving it, or they're not giving it the higher level of nutrients that it would need at the peak ripening of their fruit.
Yeah.
So essentially what they're doing is that then it's going to a certain point, and when they should be giving them that amount of nutrients maybe,
Yeah.
to give it then that extra boost, they're not. And then that's why the taste, well, from this panel that you can see, maybe it's saying that, that it does require that extra bit.
Yeah, the only thing they really noticed was a difference was in iron and zinc. But other than that, they said as long as they fed them, the plants kept taking it right till the end. So they say the ones that they did feed, they noticed kept going. But just that was maybe in a growing kind of way, not in a profile change kind of way. Because it's also something it's very late to change the road that it's on. So ultimately, I know there is something that personally I have a love for the flush because of the fade.
That's what I was
Makes
thinking.
it makes your bud beautiful.
Check that fade there.
It looks beautiful because
14,
it makes
7, 0. No.
14,
14,
10,
10,
7, 0.
10, 14,
No.
0. Because it says the plants.
Near the
were
bottom, yeah. 14, 10.
14, and leaves that were more yellow.
7, 0. Yeah, 14, 10, 7, 0. You see, I mean...
I like number B. That's a nice
With a
fade.
bit of purple and red.
Just
that
like
red.
halfway and green in the middle. Maybe B and C.
But now what we should do is, they've done the test there. They've done
Yeah.
the test where they've done, if you look at the THC levels in the
Yes.
graph there, what is the difference there? It says there,
Nothing.
at 14
Nothing.
days it was 21.5, and at 0 it was 21.62.
It was highest
It's
for the one flushed for a week.
0.4, I mean,
22.7. The one that was flushed for a week is the highest. 0.5%.
And if you think about what's happening there, look at that graph. Okay, what's happened there is 2 weeks prior to its mature date that it
Yes.
says, right?
Yeah.
They started flushing. But if you check the one where it's just before the mature date, it's at its highest point.
Yeah.
Because why? Because that's how
That's
the plant is
peak.
maturing
Yeah. So it was picking up there.
naturally.
Yeah.
Because maybe if you're real snore about it, it's also about optimizing in a sense of when is there a point of return on carrying on adding utes? Because maybe it's just not worthwhile when there's just a week
Got it.
left. And you can
Top
save a
graft.
couple bucks.
It's the
Flowering
per
weight.
plant.
Because what are you
Flowering
pushing
weight
for?
per thing. So you see the ones that have been flushed for the longest
per
actually
plant.
weigh more
Wait more. Yeah.
than the ones that weren't flushed. So you're telling me in a way that says to me, if you're saying that it's removing excess nutrients that essentially are weight, there's a weight to it, it
But-
shouldn't be there. But
But now it's actually just
it's actually
getting
there.
more juicy.
Yeah.
But the
Fruit is
debate
getting more juice.
the debate has always been weight versus taste. Because I think we've all agreed that if you keep pushing it, they'll
There's
keep going.
terpenes. The one
But if
that
you
wasn't
flush it, they
flushed had the
taste
most
better.
terps.
Yeah, exactly. It tastes better. Yeah.
The one that wasn't flushed had the most terps.
Which is
Others
against
you
the...
flushed the terps.
It's interesting. This is very interesting to see that. But
Yeah.
Because that goes against
Okay,
the
but that's
stoner
what they-
grain, man.
Check, but it's only these
Yeah,
terpenes
terpene
on the bottom, and that is mostly the cut grass terpenes and the like.
The green.
The green, the planty stuff. So
I think most guys have also been dubbed or fooled by thinking that this plant that they're smoking hasn't been flushed by because the person that grew it might have been foliar feeding something on it that doesn't agree
Late
to be
spray.
burnt.
Yeah.
A late spray that doesn't agree to be burned. They're like, oh, this thing wasn't flushed
It's
properly. And the
still
guy's
sits
like,
on the plant.
I did flush, but you didn't
It's
tell
still
us what you
sitting there.
sprayed on the plant a week before fucking harvest.
yeah,
So that could be that.
checking they all had more or less the same.
I remember
nitrogen.
getting bud from people and they were saying,
Same
no, it hasn't
potassium.
flushed, and I'm like, okay, and it tasted amazing. Really, there was no like problem. What's this?
This is like leftover nutrients in the flour.
Okay.
So there's the colors for the amount of flush days. And
I mean, look at that. The nitrogen is negligibly low. After
lower than
14 days.
You're not losing anything.
And nitrogen is probably the one that you're going to taste the most
First,
because it's chlorophyll. It's the green.
that's where it
The-
goes to, yeah. But yeah, the one flushed the most actually had the most phosphorus, marginally. If you look at that little graph there.
So yeah, I mean, looking at that is quite hard to say that you should flush.
Check sulfur even.
Shut up. They make a good argument, don't they?
Yeah, because wouldn't the plant essentially, because plants are plants, we didn't make these things.
Yeah.
They know that when they are ending their life, there's no need for them to take in nitrogen. That's why they will naturally fade, or they will grow flowers instead of leaves, because now they don't need to take nitrogen. Now they're taking in potassium and phosphorus to develop the fruit and develop the end part of it and give it that speed, that
But also
direction.
Did
they've
they
also,
make that?
in nature, they would have eaten what was available to them.
Yeah.
They wouldn't necessarily always be in a situation where you're given everything till the end. So it's nice that they're at their hungriest and they would fade naturally in nature, but isn't it nice just to push it right green till the end?
I mean, you don't have to go up with high levels of, say, nitrogen if you're going with, like hydroponic growth.
Okay.
Then you can just
Look at that.
lower the nitrogen, yes, but still feed them.
Feed them sugars
And
I've always believed that flushing should never be done with like zero.
So
with-
there's
with
different
nothing.
ways to do it that
Yes.
have more harsh and more gentle
There we go.
effects.
So some
and
people,
how does it affect your flower in the end? What's the biggest difference you can make with
so
it?
some people will go with plain water and flush it out completely where there's nothing left. Some people will go with 50% or 30% solution of their nutrients and flush the plant out, and that still allows the plant to say able to take in what it needs to continue growth until the end at its maximum. But it's realizing that it's becoming less, so by nature it's going to push and it's going to become more staunch. It's going to really decide to itself, I'm going to die.
Give it the roids, man.
Yeah.
So there's an interesting thing here. They say that the 0-day flush was the clearest with least amount of nucleation. So that was the one that got no flush. Although increased flush time resulted in higher extraction yields, so the stuff that got flushed the most yielded more dab or concentrates, the finished product was not as desirable for extraction. So it sounded like even for dabs, though the yield was lower for the 0 flush, it was more desirable again.
Because, that's just my thought, is maybe because the plant's now stressing. It's pushing more trichromes, it's not able to, It's just like
Screaming terps.
screaming. It's like pushing
Yeah,
out.
it's a sudden dietary adjustment that it didn't
Well,
expect.
it
you know,
makes
like-
sense that if it feels like it's
Maybe.
dying, it's going to remove its energy from the bits that are not necessary.
Not going to smell so good.
and
Maybe,
all
yeah.
of the energy would go into like the, let's say in a human, into the
None
brain
of them
and the
had white
heart,
ash.
into
Check
the
that.
basics of staying alive.
What is this one?
None of the plants of the respondents said, only a very little bit said that the ash burned white.
On
Mostly
14
grey and
days.
black. 14, 10, most of them said black, most of them said grey on the 7 days, and on the 0 days, most people said grey.
Yeah.
So it's really it seems like there's not
So
that much between it.
Generally, what they recommend is if you've got like a super soil, for instance, where you only feed the plants water the whole time. That's all you're going to feed it because it's a super soil. You don't need to flush that because you're essentially only giving it water. What else are you going to give it? There's nothing else.
It will
to
only take what it needs.
Exactly. If you're going in soil, I also don't believe you should be flushing, but people say that you can do for like a week or two, you know.
Yeah.
Flush the soil, but that's just, I don't know.
It sounds like whichever way you go, it's no problem, really.
Hydro in cocoa.
You're not going to damage the plant by
hydro in
doing
cocoa's
it.
2
You're
weeks
not
or
going
a
to
week.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just make sure that if you are going to flush, try and flush with pH corrected water.
At least help the plant.
At least help it because it's really stressing it if you're just giving it tap water that's a pH 8 or 7.5 or whatever it is, way out of what
That's
you
gonna
would be
make
giving
you-
it. Depending
Yeah.
on if you're in soil, it doesn't matter because again, it's going to do its own thing. But
Yeah,
in
and you can
hydro,
buy pH 8 water at Woolworths.
give it the best shot.
But then
the
your
shower then.
plant's going to start sounding like a Karen.
Yeah.
So guys, it was really interesting to actually see a study into this. There's so many stoner questions that we used to put out there that are now being answered.
Yeah.
It's good to see that. Yeah.